cloud. Okay. Hey, man.
How's it going?
Good. Long time no see.
I know, right?
Yeah. So we definitely were not talking before I hit record. And we
That's
were
right.
definitely not talking about who you are and where you live and where you moved from. So
Absolutely. It's all new information.
I know. So let's let the 3.5 people watching this, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Who are you and what are you doing here?
My name is Matt Kelley. I'm a United Methodist pastor, a member of the Tennessee Annual Conference. I'm currently serving an extension ministry in Louisville, Kentucky, with a nonprofit called Family Scholar House. Long story short, I'm kind of a chaplain to the entire nonprofit community in this area, which is a really interesting way to be in ministry. I moved to doing this after about a 20-year career in the local church. I'm here today specifically because I'm part of another nonprofit called Fathering Together. And we just released a book about a month ago called Fathering Stories Volume 1, where we're letting dads tell their stories about all kinds of aspects of fathering. And one of the values of our organization is to amplify people's voices and help people tell their stories. That's part of what we're doing.
Nice. Well, you're a dad, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I am.
Okay. You had to think about that one for a minute. That's
Yes.
and tell me about your kids.
So I have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. Kate is 11, going into 6th grade. Claire is 8, going into 3rd grade. And Jonah is 4. He's got 1 more year of preschool until he starts kindergarten. And his daycare started back this week. Thank God.
Yeah. And everyone's potty trained. We're out of that.
Oh yeah, everyone's potty trained. Yeah, but we're we're still dealing with toddler stuff with the boy, and then especially the older girl, tween stuff, hormones, attitudes, and things. So
I got a tween. So.
Oh yeah, that's right. You do. Yeah, so every day is a new day. But they're great kids. They really are. But at the end of the day, we're pretty worn out.
Nice. Yeah. Well, they take after their mother, so of course they're good.
They inherit a double portion of stubbornness from both her and me, so it's
Watch out.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So you edited this book that just came out.
That's correct. Yes.
One of the editors.
Yes.
Yeah, but and do you have a piece in there?
Yes, I wrote the first piece in there. We had a couple different sections, birth stories, adventures, legacy types of things. So we started with birth stories, chronologically. And so I wrote about the birth of my first daughter.
That's right.
When I became a father, it was during a huge ice storm, and just sort of the emotional roller coaster of that. And then the main point of the piece was that about a day and a half after she was born, I went to a Starbucks close to the hospital to get coffee for my wife and I, so she'd have some real coffee. And I saw these people going about their business. And I realized, wait, do you guys not know what's happened? And it's like, oh wait, my whole entire world just flipped upside down and everyone else's keeps going the way it does every day. And reconciling those two things.
Yeah. That's a good analogy for the current pandemic ravaging our country. Yeah.
Yes.
For some people, the world's been turned upside down, and for other people, it's like, why can't I hang out at Starbucks?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Party time, baby.
Totally.
Yeah. Which out of the 3 kids was by the 3rd kid? Did it feel less extraordinary, or were they all different? Special in their own way? I guess.
They're all special in their own way. It wasn't the emotional punch in the face with the second and the third, just because like I had experienced the birth of a child of mine before.
Yeah,
it doesn't make them less special. It just means that my this is adding to my new reality as opposed to marking the absolute end of one period of my life and the beginning of another. If that makes sense. But no less special. And I could have written interesting birth stories about all 3.
Right.
But for the book, because birth stories were part of it, I chose to do the one about becoming a father for the first time. We did have one guy who wrote about his wife giving birth very recently during the pandemic.
Hmm.
Everybody having extra equipment, both of them having to have masks. I mean, the whole thing. It was really powerful to talk about. Just like, okay, and this was their second child,
Yeah.
so this is like, we've done this before, and yet there's this whole new world happening.
Right.
It was kind of crazy.
This is all new.
Yeah. Oh my
This will be a
gosh.
story we tell that the kid tells his grandkids, or her grandkids.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was born during the pandemic. And
Yeah. The world was upside down.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Good Hamilton reference there.
What's your favorite non Matt Kelley piece in the book?
My favorite non-Matt Kelley piece.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, clearly yours is the best.
I
So
wouldn't even go. I wouldn't even go that far. I felt good about it, but we had 20 different writers who were all really brought something unique.
yeah.
Um,
Don't worry.
the
None of the rest of them are going to watch this. So if you just pick one,
Oh,
you,
I know. Yeah.
you're
Well,
done.
no, I'd
So,
say Tim Cox, who wrote the story about giving birth during the pandemic. That was it was just a he. And when we did a bunch of author interviews leading up to the or after the launch of the book, leading up to Father's Day, and he was saying he wrote that mostly as therapy for
oh
his
yeah,
just the crazy experience there. That was one of my favorites. There's another guy named Lawrence Chatters, who's one of our part of our leadership team for Fathering Together. Talked about he's an African American guy
yeah,
married to a white woman. Her dad had some issues to overcome. Let's just put it that way. And so, kind of navigating that. But then just sort of as a window of an African American man in a mostly white society, kind of a microcosm of that. I thought those were two really profound ones. There was one other guy who wrote about losing his daughter to a very tragic and violent
yeah. I read that
incident.
one.
Ivana Romeo, really powerful as well. Just kind of tugs at your heartstrings, because that's the, of course, ultimate nightmare for all of us as parents.
Yeah, yeah. How have you been? What conversations have you been having with your kids the last few months about pandemic, about
Mm-hmm.
race, about justice?
Oh gosh.
Let's just throw some more stuff in.
Yeah.
We don't have enough going on. Yeah.
Well, just to start with pandemic, we traveled recently down to Huntsville, Alabama,
Okay.
where my brother lives. My daughter went to space camp,
Okay.
and they managed to have it, which was good, with masks and temperature checks and all that.
Well, they have
Uh,
lots of helmets at space camp and spacesuits.
they they did.
Yeah.
I honestly joked to her they were going to put them in spacesuits the entire week, and she thought I was serious, and I was like, "Oh no, hang on, sweetheart."
No.
Yeah, but so my brother and his family lived there. We were gonna be there to get my daughter from space camp. My mom had her 70th birthday, and my wife had her birthday. I won't say which number. On consecutive
29.
days. 29th, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I married a much younger woman,
Mhm.
and and so there's a couple of days of family stuff there, and of course we'd all been kind of monitoring temperatures and symptoms and all that. But my 4-year-old son said, "Well, if the virus is still out, why are we going?" He said, "Is this safe?" We're like, "Yes, we are taking a little risk. We
Yeah.
are." But at the same time, we felt pretty good about it. But at the same, kind of okay, this is towing the line a bit, but it's a big celebration, particularly for my mom. Big birthday for her, so we're gonna take that risk. About some of the racial justice stuff, I mean, just explain to our girls, like, hey, you and I as white people get preferential treatment in a lot of ways that other folks don't, and it's not usually because of malice on anybody's part. I work in my work with the Family Scholar House, the nonprofit here in Louisville. I work closely with police, and most
Mhm.
of them are really good people who are just there, to try to serve and do a job, and yet there's something so unbelievably screwed up about our system that leads to these things. Breonna Taylor, one of the very famous unfortunately. Victims of police violence was here in Louisville, and that's
right.
still, yeah, I mean, still subject to nightly protests. And another African American man was killed during the protests. National Guard just starting to shoot at a crowd of folks. So it's very much a live and hot issue here. So to try to explain to our girls, and our boy too, that this is not, just one or two bad apples or even any bad people necessarily, but this is a deep systemic issue we're trying to deal with.
Yeah. It's been blowing my mind of like how it's 2020
Mm-hmm.
and we can be so technologically advanced. We're as comfortable as a species, I think, as we've ever been. I have 2 flush toilets in my house. I have
Yes.
air conditioner. It's 110 degrees outside. I have an air conditioner that blows cold. I have a magic box that keeps my food cold and frozen,
Right.
and dispenses ice and water to me.
Mm.
We're able to have this conversation thousands of miles away through technology, while I got one kid on Minecraft camp out in the other room on a computer, and another kid's playing some sort of video game, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It blows me away. We can have all these things, yet we can't wrap our heads around public health and racism.
Yeah.
And that we have all these systems. We've updated all these systems, so we're so advanced in so many ways, but then we are so archaic in these other ways. And how do we? I don't expect you to solve this, but how do we bridge that divide? How can we have Netflix, but also 1,000 people dying a day in our country from the virus, and African American folks literally being killed in the streets?
Yeah. So picking Kate up from space camp, she took us, on a little tour of the Space and Rocket Center, where she spent the week, and they have the Saturn model, the Saturn V rocket, the one that took the Apollo astronauts to the moon. I mean, they have one, standing up that you can see from the interstate, but there's another one inside this giant hall that is basically hung from the ceiling in the different stages that it's separated. And this whole hall is an exhibit about how they figured this out. They conquered all of these scientific problems. President Kennedy challenges us to get to the moon by the end of the decade, and there's okay, here's this billion questions we have to answer, and how they did that. Those are all fairly straightforward, objective questions.
Yeah.
What is the amount of thrust that is necessary to get us into orbit? Mathematical questions.
Yeah.
These other things about hunger and poverty and race are much more subjective questions that are frankly scarier, because I don't have to look inside myself to figure out what is the what amount of fuel takes a particular payload to the moon. That's an external objective question. Yeah. The other stuff is things that I have to look inside myself, particularly as a white, straight male of privilege, to say, what is my role in this? Did I ever personally own slaves? No. But do I benefit from those systems that continue from then? Yes, I do.
Yeah. And I think there's something too about when we've found comfort, our own comfort, that at that point it becomes, do we have a responsibility to help dismantle those systems, to help solve other problems?
Certainly.
You say it's not my problem. Well, but it is. Just because we live in comfort doesn't mean we can just ignore and pretend that other people's discomfort doesn't exist.
One of the many lessons I've learned as a pastor is when problems came along, they were very rarely my fault.
Yes.
They were my responsibility.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
and so I kind of apply that same lens to societal problem. Like, is this my fault specifically? No, but I have a responsibility because I get an outsized voice.
yeah,
I get outsized preference and everything
yeah,
else. So therefore, and yet at the same time, my job is not necessarily to be squawking the entire time. It is a lot of it's to listen,
yeah.
to learn about the contours and context of all that has been created around me.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it's an interesting tension where I may have an outsized responsibility and yet my voice needs to be a little more background.
Yeah. What do you think we struggle with that as church leaders or leaders in general? That is probably the number one thing that
Mm,
people call me and say, because my ministry now is mostly consulting work and
right.
trying to solve some of these big problems. And that's the number one thing. Like, hey, I don't understand these financial things, and say,
Mm,
well, okay, how have you been addressing it? Well, I haven't, because it's not my problem.
yeah.
Well,
Right.
it's not your problem, but it is literally your responsibility. So we kind of got to wrap our heads around that, and
Yeah.
try to work with a lot of pastors on that. Is that like a
Mhm.
cultural thing? Is it a generational thing? Like what do you think is going on there?
I think it's probably both. Generationally, just because they're, my grandparents, the greatest generation, my parents, the boomers, they had much more institutional loyalty
Hmm.
than our generation does. And then certainly whatever they're going to call my kids' Generation COVID, I don't even know what the name's going to be.
Right.
But I served one church in particular in the Nashville area that had been a big pillar, big steeple church for a long time. Um, it was one of the premier appointments, but by the time I got there, it wasn't. The area changed a lot demographically, ethnically. The airport had built nearby, so just became more kind of working class industrial, a lot of immigrant heavy. They, I mean, just lived off their endowments and savings for 30 years and never met their budget and everything, but they could use that as a shield to kind of live in denial for a long time.
Yeah.
And they'd committed death by a thousand cuts, the way most churches do. Cut this staff position, do this thing. The first year I got there, we spent, oh God, I think $50,000 in deferred maintenance.
Wow.
Stuff we wouldn't have had to do had they, had the AC units maintenance every year the way you're supposed to.
Yeah.
But they started leaking and there was a mold issue and all these things that just like, it's just the product of denial.
Hmm.
Putting it off doesn't mean you don't have to deal with it. It just means it festers and gets worse.
Yeah.
And so maybe in some ways that could be a metaphor for our own cultures. We have the luxury and frankly the resources to just kind of live in denial for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And maybe that endowment account's running dry.
Yeah. It catches up eventually, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you figure out how to
So
break that, then let me know. We'll write a book, and
it's seriously.
yeah, we'll make a lot of money, and then we can go live in comfort and ignore the world's problems.
There you go. Exactly.
No, wait, that's not funny.
Precisely.
Oh.
That is the white man's strategy, though, isn't it? To cash out.
Sadly, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Well, on that note, let's ignore the world's problems. And
Absolutely.
what are you watching and listening to these days?
Oh boy, I'm watching it. So my family has been nuts about Hamilton for a couple of years. So now that that's live streaming, we've definitely been watching that.
Names.
Yeah, we in the last church I served in Nashville, we had a youth talent show every year,
Hmm.
part of raising money for some of their missional stuff. And it was a tradition. The staff would do lip sync. So one year my family got up and lip synced Schuyler Sisters. We had costumes and the whole bit. It was lots of fun. So my kids are making their way through different kid shows on Netflix. My son is watching this show called Odd Bodies,
Oh,
which is like these in those old McDonald's commercials. There was some purple furry thing I don't even remember what it was called,
Oh
but
yeah.
it didn't,
Uh-huh.
and it didn't even really talk.
What was the name?
Um,
Oh, I
I
know
don't
the name. It's
know.
on.
It wasn't Grimace, but it was no,
Yeah.
no. Excuse me, it was red because Grimace was purple.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, it's Shaggy, almost like a cousin from the Addams Family.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's like a show full of these things, and they just kind of speak gibberish, and they're in the different scenarios where they get mad at each other and have wacky stuff happen, but you can kind of tell what it is,
Hmm.
which is really good for kids. I mean, obviously he has a great vocabulary, but he can't read and stuff yet. Um, let's see. Oh, my wife and I are watching Mrs. America about
Okay.
from FX. It's on Hulu. It's about sort of the second wave of feminists in the fight to try to pass the Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution. So
Oh, cool.
Phyllis Schlafly, Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, those folks, kind of in the the
Okay.
70s
Yeah.
era, and so there's a bit of a Mad Men quality to it in terms of like being a period piece, but one of the actors from Mad Men is also on there, but just dealing with
Yeah.
gendered. Every now and then you hear like a sort of comment by a man, usually that's like so unbelievably sexist, and yet it's like of the time. We're like, oh my god! So it's
Yeah.
yeah.
And then you're like,
So it's
oh wait, I think I heard that last week.
pretty much
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that's been fodder for interesting conversations with us as well.
Yeah. Have you guys gotten into Floor's Lava at all?
Yes. Oh, my kids love that show. Because
Nice.
they liked Ninja Warrior
Mm.
and whatever version of that Sylvester Stallone put up. The Beast, I think, is what it was called. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
extreme athlete obstacle course things. So
Yeah.
Floor's Lava is pretty fun.
Yeah.
That's a cool show.
My
Yeah.
9-year-old was into it for like the first episode, and then we went to the second episode, and he's like, "Wait, do they just do the same thing every episode? They have to." Like, yeah, it's the point to not like fall in the lava. He's like, "This is dumb." And
Well, it's
you know,
different rooms. It's different rooms of the house, but yeah.
exactly. Even though he's totally into Ninja Warrior, but I
Right.
guess the courses are different enough for him. I don't know,
I guess.
but yeah,
Yeah, my kids definitely got into. I mean, they did a good job of making real characters out of the different groups. Because every episode they'd be like, "Oh, I like that team. Or I don't like that team."
yeah.
They did that with. There's a show on Disney Plus called Be Our Chef. It's a cooking show with families,
Oh,
hosted by Angela from The Office, who's like in real life she's the exact opposite of her character from The Office.
right.
But it was a cooking competition between families, and the girls
Yeah.
would definitely pick sides, and because they like to cook.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have to
Yeah.
check that one out.
Yeah, it's a fun show because every episode's a theme from a different Disney movie.
Oh, cool. I'm glad we had this conversation. Yeah.
There you go. If we get nothing else out of this, your family's.
I got a new show to watch.
There you go.
All right, we're heading towards the end here, and there's
Okay.
two pieces we always do.
Yeah,
Even though there are no rules, so I can change it up anytime. It's my show.
absolutely.
Do you have a question for me? You get to ask me anything.
Since you've moved into a consulting role,
Mm-hmm.
what do you and you get to have much more of a 30,000-foot view of the church nowadays?
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the church?
Oh man, well, we only got 5 minutes left.
Right.
This is like a 5-hour thing. So
I know, right?
The Reader's Digest version is when I came off of leave, a year of leave, I came right into a grant-funded research project about religious participation in the U.S., and I got to go pick a market research firm to work with and work with them for a year on this study, and it was really cool.
Nice.
And essentially what the major finding of that is the world's broken into along a continuum of, on one side we have traditionalists, on the other side we have explorers, and the explorers are folks included in that are the folks we may say are spiritual but not religious.
Yeah.
And they may be going to church, they may not be, and there's a lot of people sort of sitting right on the edge of church. But traditionalists are mostly our folks sitting in the pews who need that direction hey, there are rules, we follow the rules. There's an authority. I listen to the authority and I do what I'm supposed to do. I do what I do what that authority tells me is right. And explorers are all about, on the extreme end, don't tell me what to do. Nobody can tell me what to do. I'll figure it out on my own, or I want to figure it out on my own. And the world is progressively shifting more and more as older generations are dying off. Younger generations are explorers, and people move along that continuum throughout their life, but they're staying in that explorer phase longer and longer. So where we used to say, when a family has kids and you come back, they're going to come back to church. Well, if you didn't grow up in church in the first place, or your spouse is not a church person, or you're getting married later or not getting married at all, that's longer and longer. You're not doing that thing you did as a kid. And so therefore there's less of a drive or a want or a need to go back.
Sure.
But people are still very spiritual. They still have a personal faith or spirituality. And that to me is where the alarm bells are going off of, we don't just need to switch up churches with different music and carpet colors and relevant sermons or whatever else, or to be more political this way or that way. We need to create more forms of community where people can sort of figure this out on their own terms. And so that's actually what I've been working, developing a proof of concept of what one of those communities could look like. And we can talk more offline, but that's the biggest challenge, is realizing we need to continue to offer really great stuff for traditionalists, but we also need to be putting a lot of time and resources in innovating for explorers. And we're just not doing that. And every year that we don't do that, the more sort of grim our prospects come, as at least as institutional religion. And some people may say that's fine, let's just let it die, and something will birth on its own. And that may well be what happens. But we do have an opportunity, because we still have a great amount of resources in institutionalized religion, to say, hey, maybe we should be investing in this way, instead of trying to make everybody move to one model. Let's be sort of a buffet, if you will. Except we're not supposed to have buffets anymore. That's people. Can't touch the same labels. I don't know how far the metaphor extends beyond that. So anyway,
wow.
Yeah, that is the very, very short version of what I see needs to happen. So
that could definitely be a 5-hour conversation for sure.
Yeah. And always open to have it. Last thing, do you have a word of hope for folks?
Word of hope for folks. Oh man, put me on the spot.
Yeah. If you watched the show before, you know this is always the last question.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I should have done my homework a little better. In conversations with folks, along similar bit about the future of the church, an interesting theme that has come up in a lot of different conversations is looking at us, the United Methodist Church, but just the institutional religion in general, about kind of like late Temple Judaism.
Say that again, you broke up.
Late First Temple Judaism.
Oh, yes.
Or, Israel after the two kingdoms have split up and the barbarians are at the gate, literally.
Sure.
Pretty far gone. Could be redeemed. Probably won't do what we need to do to be redeemed. And yet at the end of the day, God is still God. And God's work and God's kingdom will outlast structures that have a life cycle. Our structures are probably very much at the end of their life cycle.
Yeah.
And that's caused for a lot of consternation, particularly for those of us that make our livelihood through such structures.
Right.
And yet at the end of the day, God is still God. God is still going to work. And so that can, if nothing else, at least help ratchet down our anxiety a teeny bit.
Yeah. Amen. Well, thank you, sir. Tell everybody again where they can go, name of the book and where they can find it.
Okay, it's called Fathering Stories Volume 1. It's an ebook. You can get it anywhere ebooks are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever. You can also get it through our website, fatheringtogether.org, and you'll find a link at the top to particular storytelling aspect of the work that we do. But yeah, Fathering Stories Volume 1, it's $1.99 on different ebook retailers.
Easy.
If you forgot to get Dad a Father's Day gift a couple of weeks ago, and you're just like, hey, here's this, you can, a couple of clicks and get it to his e-reader. And
Nice.
it's 20 different authors, folks from all over the spectrum of ethnicity, race, areas of the country, just sharing anecdotes about what being a dad is like. So I
Awesome.
think you'll find something to connect with. Also find some things that'll challenge you.
Cool. Well, thanks, man. Thanks for all you do, and
Yeah.
thanks for being first guest on the historic second season of
All
Conversations with
right.
Rob.
Thanks
To
for
all three of our watchers out there, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
Thank you.